Hello, humans! Hello, humans of the world, humans of Minnesota, humans of the Twin Cities, humans of all humans. How are you? Good Monday morning. The first Monday in February of 2020. Hooray! We're making our way through what I call the five bad boys. The five bad boys go from November through March. That's the bad boys as far as I'm concerned. And once we get past them, then we get to go to warmth and, well, sort of warmth anyway. Anyway, hello, this is Ellie Krug on Ellie 2.0 Radio, here to talk with you about idealism and idealists and trying to change the world and trying to do our best. Okay? This is where I highlight people who are idealistic as well. We've got a great show. The big interview is with Greta Kaul. She is a journalist with MinnPost who has been covering the decision of the Beltrami County Board of Supervisors to bar refugees from relocating in that county, even though, frankly, there had been a refugee in Beltrami County at least 5 years. And, of course, you'll hear my C block, where I'll talk about my work as a practical idealist. I'm going to talk with you about me speaking at churches. But first, let me begin with our featured idealist of the week. But I need to preface all that by saying that not every idealist is entirely likable or popular. I have a doozy of an idealist coming up for you in future weeks. You'll be like, Ellie, really? But it doesn't mean that their idealism isn't critical. It doesn't mean that they're not changing the world. It doesn't mean that they're not making all of us better for their work. So this week, I'm featuring an idealist who is just one of those perhaps not likable to some people person. Her name is Ingrid Newkirk. She's the controversial co-founder of People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, PETA. Okay, now some of you are like well familiar with PETA. Others of you are like, what is that? Isn't that a pet store? Sorry. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with PETA, but probably do not know the name Ingrid Newkirk, who is one of the co-founders. And I really didn't know about Ingrid Newkirk until seeing her on an episode of Real Time with Bill Maher. And in fact, Bill Maher called Ingrid Newkirk a hero, one of his heroes. That's got to be about the highest compliment you can get paid, because Bill Maher is pretty grudging about the way he admires people. And of course, say what you will about Bill Maher. Perhaps I should highlight him sometime as an idealist. Think about that, Ellie. All right, here's the story on Ingrid Newkirk, briefly. She was born in England, and because of her father's job, spent much of her childhood in New Delhi. She is presently 70 years old. So her father had a job that took him from England to India, where Ingrid Newkirk entered a boarding school eventually in the Himalayas. Two important things happened in Newkirk's life in India. First, her mother volunteered for Mother Teresa at a leper colony. Newkirk frequently helped her mother in that work and saw firsthand how people who are other were treated. She learned from her mother's work in the leper colony that anyone in need was worthy of concern. The second incident that happened to Newkirk in India involved her seeing a group of people torture a dog. Newkirk rescued the dog only for it to die in her arms. So that kind of set the stage a little bit for her. In 1970, after marrying, Newkirk moved to Poolsville, I like Ellie, you can't even pronounce today, Maryland. It's a far suburb of D.C. She was studying to be a stockbroker when she came across a group of abandoned kittens, which she took to a local animal shelter. She later found out that the kittens were euthanized by that shelter. That was not what Newkirk intended for it to happen to those kittens. And that outraged Newkirk, so much so that she subsequently got a job at that very shelter where she had taken the kittens, where she then later on went to document countless animal abuses at that shelter in Maryland. She later went public with information about those abuses at that shelter. A series of events led to Newkirk, who had no real education in animal management or control, to become Washington, D.C.'s first female pound master. Okay? As an idealist must do, she used her imagination to then persuade the city of Washington, D.C. to set up a pet adoption program and an investigations department for animal cruelty and a pet sterilization program. I mean, so Newkirk gets this role. It wasn't one that she had intended to take. She takes up believing in the value of animals and the need to protect them, and then she starts using her imagination, as idealists do, on how to tackle a number of different problems. In 1980, Newkirk met a man named Alex Pacheco, who introduced Newkirk to the idea of animal rights. At the time, 1980, the concept of animal rights as a movement was alive in England, and it was based on the idea that all living things have basic rights. Newkirk and Pacheco, who later on became lovers, that's just an aside there, along with a handful of other people, decided to form a group to educate people about animal rights. The bellwether event for PETA, what would become PETA, was something that happened in 1981 when Pacheco, now remember, co-founder of PETA, volunteered at a place called the Institute of Behavioral Research in Silver Spring, Maryland. The Institute of Behavioral Research was a place where researchers used animals, mainly macaw monkeys, to perform a series of experiments. And when Pacheco volunteered at the Institute of Behavioral Research, he saw that they were working with 17 macaw monkeys, and they were essentially abusing them. There were experiments that they were trying to conduct on nerve migration and nerve generation, and the animals' nerves of the monkeys, nerves to their arms and legs had been cut so the monkeys couldn't use their arms and legs, and then the monkeys were placed in physical restraints for nerve-ending experiments to see whether or not electric shock and other forms of promotion could cause the animals to move their legs or their arms. It sounded pretty horrible. And Pacheco ended up taking some pictures of these monkeys in these restraints. It looked actually very horrible. And so later, Newkirk and Pacheco then told the police about what was going on at this research facility, which led to the police raiding the facility and the lead researcher being charged with animal cruelty. Later on, the lead researcher was ultimately cleared of those charges. And I can't get into the details about that, but when all of this came down with the police raiding the facility, the Washington Post ran a story about the raid and about Newkirk and Pacheco and their organization. It ran on page 1 with a photo of one of the monkeys in restraints. It went worldwide. So that was prior to social media. Newkirk and Pacheco were able to achieve worldwide attention to their group through this police raid on the Behavioral Institute. They put PETA on the map. It also kind of set the stage for Newkirk to decide that anything that she could do to get publicity would be something that would be valuable to PETA. So also, as a result of their work, changed federal law. It changed federal law to better protect animals. So, I mean, it was not something that was just in a vacuum. So, in turn, Ingrid Newkirk became kind of a media hound who has said that she'd do anything to protect animals. For example, in 2003, she wrote to then Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat to protest his use of a donkey as a suicide bomber. Yeah, she did that. She published the letter to him. Newkirk has also supported the Animal Liberation Front, which has engaged in various acts of property damage and destruction, such as burning down animal research facilities or releasing animals like minks into the wild. That is, before the minks could be made into mink coats. Newkirk has said she doesn't condone the methods of the Animal Liberation Front, but certainly supports their philosophy and their ends. If you want to learn more about Ingrid Newkirk, you can pick up her books. She's got one book titled Making Kind Choices, and then a second book titled Animal Kind. Or you could view a video about her life. The video is titled I Am an Animal, the story of Ingrid Newkirk and PETA. Finally, just a connection from left field. Think about how humans have impacted defenseless animals repeatedly in this world. So think about the Australia fires that have killed, some estimates are, 500 million animals. 500 million. We all are interrelated. That is really what the animal rights movement is about. We are. And there's a whole lot more that we do not understand about the animal world, about how they interact with each other and with us. So, Ingrid Newkirk, idealist. Read up about her. And when we come back from our break, that takes care of that segment. When we come back from our break, I'm going to speak with Greta Kaul from MinnPost. If you like what you hear, visit my website at elliekrug.com. We'll be back. Thanks.
The hand inside you.
Brending Electrolysis on Grand Avenue in St. Paul has been a leader in permanent hair removal for people of all skin types and backgrounds for over 30 years, celebrating diversity and priding themselves on finding the right treatment plan for each client's individual needs, regardless of race or gender. Services include electrolysis, body waxing, facials, microneedling, and permanent makeup. Book your 60-minute complimentary consultation, including a 15-minute treatment today for beautiful, lasting results. Visit brendingelectrolysis.com.
Better Futures Minnesota is a social enterprise which helps men achieve self-sufficiency and a better future for themselves and their communities. We need your help. By donating time or funds to our cause, you can support us and promote a healthier environment. By hiring our deconstruction crews for your next residential or commercial project and shopping or donating building materials or appliances to our reuse retail warehouse, you are supporting Better Futures Minnesota and your community. Please visit betterfuturesminnesota.com to learn more.
How long till my soul gets it right? Will any human being ever reach that kind of light? I call on the resting soul of Galilee.
And we're back on AM 950, Ellie 2.0 radio. Yes, go read up on Ingrid Newkirk and PETA. It's an interesting story, I'll tell you that, but I've got to give her and her colleagues a lot of credit for getting PETA to be such an incredibly a well-known name. All right, well, listen, this is, we're now time to talk about idealism, and I usually do the big interview with an idealist. Today, I don't necessarily have an idealist, but I have somebody who can help us understand the needs for idealism. I have Greta Kaul on the phone. She is MinnPost data reporter. She's got a bachelor's degree in journalism and political science from the University of Minnesota, and she's had some stints in San Francisco and San Antonio as a reporter and as a Hearst Fellow. Greta, welcome to Ellie 2.0 Radio. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm just doing really great, and I really appreciate you being on the show. Greta,
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. You got on my radar because you've been reporting on what's going on in Beltrami County, or more likely what's not gone on. And I have a special interest in Beltrami County for a couple of reasons. One of those reasons being that I'm trying to do more work in Greater Minnesota, which you may have some inkling about, is that I go and train on human inclusivity across North America. But I've been trying to focus on Greater Minnesota, the Greater Midwest, because there are a lot of needs out there. So I had great interest about Beltrami County. And just to lay the foundation, Greta, why don't you tell us what has happened up in Beltrami County as it relates to refugees? And then I've got some other questions for you.
Yeah, so Beltrami County has made the news in basically this month for being the first county in Minnesota to vote no on a question about whether or not to allow refugees to settle there when they first come to the state. This vote, your listeners might have heard about other counties voting too. These votes were prompted by an executive order from the Trump administration that came out in, I believe, September, that sought to give an unprecedented level of control in the refugee resettlement process to local governments, meaning states and counties. So it would require both states and counties to consent to have refugees placed in a county, basically.
Right. And if I understand correctly about the executive order, it requires you to take affirmative action if you want refugees, if you're willing to allow refugees to settle in your jurisdiction. And that if you do nothing, for example, you just kind of let the calendar go by and you don't take any vote, you don't consider this in some affirmative way, then that's considered a no vote. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so the way the executive order worked is that there was a June 1st deadline before it goes into effect. Now, the reason we've been having a lot of these votes in January and December was because agencies that resettle refugees were working with a January 21st deadline to apply for funding from the federal government to work with refugees. So they were asking counties to give them consent earlier than the June 1st deadline. And yes, if counties didn't vote affirmatively or decide, if you didn't vote one way or another at all, it would essentially be a no vote because you have to opt in as a county.
Right. And I mean, and I know that you don't want to talk about political considerations, but I'm just going to make an observation. You know, it seems darn convenient that if you don't take this on, in other words, it's requiring states or local jurisdictions to take the issue on and put it in front of people, that if you don't take the issue on, then you're going to be counted as if you don't want refugees. And I know you're not going to comment on that, but I'm just going to say I think that there's just something incredibly wrong about that, frankly. And, and I think that it feeds into some things, but we don't need to get into that.
Well, yeah, I want to make it clear that I'm a news reporter.
Yep.
I work for a nonpartisan news organization, and I just report what happened.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hearing people say that. And another thing that is interesting about this executive order as it pertains to Minnesota is that if you look at the numbers over time, only 43 of Minnesota's 87 counties have had any refugees resettle within their bounds when they first came to the U.S. in the last 10 years.
Right.
And you're seeing, I think, 90% or more of those refugees that came in the last 10 years came to 5 counties. So we're dealing really with a small number of counties that have actually had refugees come and primarily settle in their county. Also interesting is when people come here, they are primarily settled in a county, which means the State Department and a nonprofit that resettles refugees work together to bring them to that county. But as soon as they land on U.S. soil, people with refugee status are allowed to move anywhere they want.
Right. So, but I think it's more about calling upon jurisdictions to do this symbolic thing that is, I mean, just from me as a standpoint, as an idealist, it just irks the heck out of me. But the good news is, and some of what you and I are talking about at this point is a little bit to the side, because on January 15th, we had a federal judge essentially enjoin the effect of that executive order, saying that it was illegal or improper. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so on January 15th, that's right, a federal judge in Maryland temporarily blocked the executive order. So that basically means we're back to the status quo for refugee resettlement. So
right.
The State Department is working with nonprofits to resettle people as they did before the injunction until there's a resolution otherwise on that. And that could happen if the Trump administration decides to appeal, which, as far as I know, they haven't yet. So counties have sort of decided, well, like I was saying, a lot of counties were sort of trying to vote before that January 21st deadline. Many of them who had scheduled votes on January 21st decided kind of not to vote after all because of the injunction.
Right.
I think some of them don't want to go through the process of having the debates in the community if it's not something that's actually going to end up affecting their community. Other ones are saying
Right.
we don't want to expend the resources, and so they're putting off the votes. I've been in touch with a lot of counties. In Stearns County, which resettles the second largest number of refugees per capita in Minnesota after Ramsey County, they actually had the refugee resettlement agency that was applying to resettle refugees rescind their request because of the injunction. So they're not asking for permission because they don't need it as it stands right now.
Right,
with
and
the injunction in place.
And they don't want to put elected officials on the spot. Greta, we're going to have to take a break, but when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about Beltrami, but I also want to talk about the value of data, since you're the data reporter, okay?
Sure.
All right, we'll be back in a second. Listeners, we've been talking to Greta Kaul from MinnPost about refugees and Beltrami County and some other things. When we come back, we'll talk more. If you like what you hear on the show, visit my website at elliekrug.com. Email me at elliejkrug@gmail.com. We'll be back in a sec. Thanks.
Now she's starting to rise.
At Better Futures Minnesota, we believe everyone deserves a fair shot. We believe in personal redemption and second chances, and that those who are dedicated to change and hard work should have the opportunity to achieve success and make a positive impact in the community. The men we embrace and serve have made mistakes, but they aren't bad people. We work with men who take responsibility for their past and are committed to doing better, who work to create a better life for themselves, their family, and the community. Learn more at betterfuturesminnesota.com.
This is Ellie Krug from Ellie 2.0 Radio on Mondays from 7 to 8 a.m. Many listeners know that I founded Human Inspiration Works, LLC, which trains on human inclusivity and on how to be welcoming to diverse humans. Today, organizations of all sizes find that they need to train team members on diversity and inclusion. I can do that. Many say that my trainings change the way they see the world. I'd love to help make your organization more welcoming. For more information, go to humaninspirationworks.com. Thank you. And we're back on AM 950, Ellie 2.0 Radio. Before we broke, we were speaking with, and we will continue to speak with, Greta Kaul from MinnPost. She is the data reporter for MinnPost. And I don't know, listeners, if you're familiar with MinnPost, but it's an online newspaper, magazine that is incredibly important. It certainly educates me a great deal about what's going on in Minnesota as well as in the country. Greta, before we broke, we were talking about the refugees, the situation up in Beltrami County. And I'm correct on this? I mean, when we talk about refugees, we're not talking about, and for lack of a better phrase, plain old immigrants. We are talking about people who are coming to our country from areas that have experienced war or some kind of natural disaster, folks who might otherwise ordinarily not want to go live in another country, but in their lives they have no choice. They need to get out of where they're at. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so I think after I started writing about this, I realized a lot of people don't quite understand what refugee means. It's one of many words that's often used for immigrants, but it actually has a very specific meaning. And one of the things that's most confusing about refugees is the term kind of has two meanings. On a global scale, there's sort of a UN definition that refers to a person who's fled their home country due to some kind of persecution or war, like you talked about. But as far as the United States government is concerned, it's also a legal definition. It's a status that people can get, not unlike asylee or green card holder. So it's sort of its own category of immigration status that's separate from some of these other statuses because it refers to somebody who is living in a country that, for whatever reason, persecution or war is dangerous for them. And so they apply through this
Right.
program to come to the United States. That's different from an asylee, although they often face similar circumstances in their home country, because an asylee typically shows up in the United States. We've heard a lot recently about people from Central America coming to the United States over the U.S.-Mexico border. So they come into the country and then they apply for status. So the difference is sort of where it happens. For
Right.
refugees, they're applying in their home country. For asylees, they're applying once they get to the United States.
Right. And if you're seeking asylum, I think under federal law, you get the right to have a hearing automatically. So
Yeah, and that process happens through immigration court versus this refugee process that happens through the U.S. Department of State, basically.
Okay. And partly what's also going on with refugees is that the United States, I mean, it sets a limit or a quota of the number of refugees it would take each year, and it has, under the Trump administration, progressively reduced that number that they're willing to accept in the U.S.
Yeah, this year it's capped at 18,000. I think
Yeah.
the fiscal year 2019, it was 30,000. So it's
Right.
about half, a little more than half of what it had been.
And it was higher than that in prior administrations. I mean,
Correct.
part of this is just goes against what America, stands for, and it just. Okay, well, you can hear the frustration. I want to talk with you now about the fact that you're the data reporter for MinnPost. And I find this interesting, and there's a reason I'm asking about this, okay? So, as you know from here on air a little bit, but off air as well, I'm an idealist. I am somebody, literally, almost every minute I'm awake trying to work to change the world. And I have found, and I'm a prior executive director for a nonprofit. I helped found a legal access nonprofit and ran that for 5 years. And in the course of that, I learned about the importance of data and the importance of metrics. So tell me a little bit, what does the data reporter from MinnPost do? And then I want to ask you a couple of questions about how data is so incredibly relevant.
Sure. So when I was in journalism school about 10 years ago, which gives you a sense of how old I am, data was really an emerging field in journalism. It was something that maybe there was one class on in journalism schools. And the goal was to get journalists to start using some of the data that's now available from literally every level of government. Every agency is producing just massive amounts of data. And what data reporting seeks to do is to use that data to tell stories. So
Okay.
a lot of what I do is either get an idea for a story through something that's happening in the news. Like an example would be this refugee executive order, or else sometimes I download a data set and look for stories in it and just sort of ask it questions as you would a source.
Right.
How have things changed over time? You can sometimes see in data what's the biggest and the smallest numbers, and are they interesting for some reason, that type of thing. But an example of a recent story would be in the midst of this, the news about this refugee, refugee resettlement votes. We had heard that Beltrami County was the first county in Minnesota to vote no on resettlement, and had seen that Beltrami County hadn't had any refugees resettle in at least 5 years, 10 years. And so I decided to go look for data that would show us how many refugees different counties in Minnesota had resettled, because I think that's informative and it helps us understand sort of the parameters of this debate a little better.
Well, and in the case of the refugees, it just shows that, I mean, from an idealistic standpoint, it just shows that we have a lot of people that are afraid, certainly up in Beltrami County. And, I have, this is neither here nor there, but as soon as the Beltrami story broke, I actually started reaching out to contacts in Beltrami County asking if I could go up there and train and speak on human inclusivity. Unfortunately, out of 4 contacts, not a single one has returned my inquiry, and that is very disappointing to me. But The reason I wanted to ask about data is that, there are trends going on in the state right now as it relates to human inclusivity and as it relates to changing the way our state is changing in terms of color and in terms of other demographics. So are you tracking, the information about people of color other than white color, living and moving to counties that are outside the 7-county metro? Have you been watching that data at all?
I kind of watch a little bit of everything as part of my job. I don't have
Okay.
a specific beat, so I cover a little bit of everything. But I do cover, a lot of what I cover, especially because Minnesota has pretty big racial and ethnic disparities, has to do with those disparities and also just because we cover Minnesota, how Minnesota is changing is a big part of that too.
So what are you seeing on your end? I mean, I'm hearing anecdotally, although I haven't looked at numbers, like Faribault, that, in the elementary school, in certainly K through, 1 to 3 to 4th grades, that predominantly the color of skin of the students is not white in the Faribault schools.
Yeah, we hear about that in a lot of communities. I think Worthington's another example.
Yep.
And some other communities in greater Minnesota as well.
So from just from an analytical data standpoint, what kind of conclusions are you drawing from that? I know I'm hitting you cold about this because I didn't ask you that off air, but
No,
hey,
it's all good.
Go ahead. What kind of?
Yeah, so I think what it tells us, I mean, the kids of today are the adults of tomorrow, right? And so in Minnesota, the future is going to look a lot more diverse than it does now. I used to live in California and Texas, which are much more diverse states than Minnesota, but I think Minnesota's future looks a lot more diverse than it does now.
Well,
and a
yep.
lot of that has to do, if you look at international migration numbers, with folks coming from other countries. Minnesota has had a lot of people come through the refugee program, and that's sort of created these pockets where we have much more diverse communities.
And from an idealistic standpoint, I find that this is wonderful, okay? And I think it's proof that people don't need to be afraid, that communities can be welcoming. Well, I know that there are challenges in each of these communities, okay? But the fact that people feel at least safe enough to go live there, people who are different or other, I think it's positive. I mean, the last stat I saw, and maybe you'll be able to correct me, is that the state as a whole is about 20% people of color other than the white color. Do you have a different stat than that?
I think that's about right. And
Yeah.
if you look at the Twin Cities, it's significantly more. And if you look at some of those cities, like talked about, Faribault, Worthington, Austin, Minnesota, places like that, you have a higher share of people of color.
Yeah, and I think that I don't think that a lot of Minnesotans understand this. I mean, many times, so when I train, I throw out questions to the audience, and one of the questions I throw out when I'm not in like Minneapolis or St. Paul is what percentage of people of color other than the white color live in Minnesota? And you know what? Most people have no idea. I've had answers ranging from 4% to 50%, and I'm like, 50%? Where do you live? And of course, knowing data is so important because it helps us to inform about the pulse. It also helps us to plan for the future, right?
Yeah, that's one thing that I like about data a lot is I find that it helps me provide context to the news. At MinnPost, we have a smaller staff. We don't go cover every breaking event that happens because we just don't have the bodies to do that. We try to do a little bit more of an analytical take on the news, help people understand the context or why something is part of the debate and things like that. And I find that data really helps with that because it can just help people have a much bigger understanding of an issue, whatever it is.
So Greta, one last question for you, okay?
Sure.
And I ask everyone that I interview on the show this, and that is, are you an idealist?
I don't know that I've ever considered myself an idealist. I've always sort of considered myself a realist, and maybe that comes from being a reporter, or maybe it's what attracted me to being a reporter. I'm not sure. I try to look at the situation as it is and sort of act accordingly. But I don't necessarily know that I would consider myself an idealist.
Well, I'm going to throw a bug in your ear, okay?
All right.
because, you've already revealed that you're on the younger end of the spectrum. And I'm going to just throw this at you, okay? And I know you're a journalist and you need to be objective and all of that stuff, but everybody has a day job, and then you have time to go home. And so I'm gonna urge you to think about the idea, the possibility that you and maybe some of your cohorts could be idealists. That you could start looking at the world in a way not necessarily as it is, but as it possibly could be, with hard work and visioning and a lot more hard work, because the world's got to be better. We got to get it to a better place than where it is right now. So I'm just throwing that at you, okay?
All right.
All right. Well, listen, Greta, I appreciate you being on Ellie 2.0 Radio. I've enjoyed talking to you. Keep up the good work at MinnPost. Let the folks at MinnPost know they've got a friend over here at this in this show. And just thanks a lot for being on Ellie 2.0.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. Well,
take care.
All right. Thank you. We've been speaking with Greta Kaul from MinnPost about data in Beltrami County. When we come back from the show, we'll do my C block, and where I'll talk about my work. Thanks so very much. We'll be back in a sec.
At Better Futures Minnesota, we transform the lives of men and support Minnesota's environment by working towards zero waste. Our approach reaffirms each man's dignity and supports self-sufficiency. Better Futures Minnesota is a work training model. Through our reuse, retail warehouse, and supervised work crews which specialize in residential and commercial building deconstruction, property maintenance, appliance recycling, and janitorial services, we demonstrate ways to employ hard-to-employ men on a pathway to independence. Hire our work crews at betterfuturesminnesota.com.
Brending Electrolysis on Grand Avenue in St. Paul has been a leader in permanent hair removal for people of all skin types and backgrounds for over 30 years, celebrating diversity and priding themselves on finding the right treatment plan for each client's individual needs, regardless of race or gender. Services include electrolysis, body waxing, facials, microneedling, and permanent makeup. Book your 60-minute complimentary consultation, including a 15-minute treatment today for beautiful, lasting results. Visit brendingelectrolysis.com. And we're back. Ellie 2.0 Radio on AM 950. Hello, everyone. Greta Kaul. Yes, maybe I could make her think a little bit, at least, about becoming an idealist. And I am positive there are many of you out there, as soon as she said, well, I'm really more of a realist. And for me, I certainly respect realists, and I certainly respect folks who are grounded in what's going on and all of that stuff. But you know what? We got to dream. And we got to have visions for how the world can be better. We do. And then we have to work towards that. We do. Because if we're just realistic, this is the way it is, and I'm not trying to be critical or demeaning to Greta or other realists, but if we just sit and say, this is the way it is, how in the world are we going to get beyond it? Okay, I'm in my C block here, where I talk about my work as a practical idealist, and I am an idealist. I am. So here's the way I operate. Much of what I do is I focus as much as I can, then I plan, and then I try to execute. Now, you have to understand, it's an army of one. It's just Ellie Krug. Although I will tell you, I have a number of people who absolutely believe in my work and are so willing to help me on per item basis when I need help. But that's the way I operate. I get in my head, we've got to do something. For example, like you just heard in the prior segment where I need to go to Beltrami County. And I've had 4 people who've just not responded to my inquiries, but that doesn't mean I won't keep trying. I'm very persistent. So for this year, what have I focused on? What have I planned on? And I'm not only focusing on my regular work of training and speaking to companies and governmental entities and all kinds of other places about human inclusivity, but I've also, for 2020, decided I'm going to talk at more churches. And so far this year, I've spoken at 3 different churches. I think that's about the whole number that I spoke at in 2019. So I'm like ready to keep going. Some of these churches have been in the outer suburb rings of the Twin Cities. And that's important to me because the churches that are in the inner rings, and I'm fine to come to churches that are in the immediate metro, that's absolutely fine with me. But the churches that are in the outer rings are not used to having people who are different or other address them. Okay? They may not have many different or other congregants or parishioners. So I'm going to put this out there right now to every one of you listeners, okay? Here we go. I would like to come to your church, particularly if it's farther away from downtown Minneapolis or St. Paul, but even if it's closer, don't worry. I want to come to your church and I want to present. Now, I'm not going to do that for free because I find that when I do work that doesn't cost, it does not get valued. But I will do it for what I call low bono, okay? And low bono means I reduce my fee like by 90%. But I do think there's value in having people pay something because they pay more attention, the attendance is much greater, and people are far better organized than when, it's free, well, whether she shows up, whatever. Okay? So anyway, I'm putting that out there to everyone. I would like to come to your church. If you want to reach me, if you want to take me up on this offer or find out more about it, you can email me at elliejkrug@gmail.com or go to my website at elliekrug.com if you can't remember the email address. You got to throw the J in on the email, but just go to elliekrug.com. You can get my email address all over the place, or reach out to AM 950. They'll let you know, okay? They'll get you my email. So, this is prompted by a couple of things. One is that many churches want to be welcoming to all people, but their exposure to humans who are other is very limited. I already just said that. Also, my message is universal. My message is about having compassion for others and for oneself. As someone emailed me who had heard me speak at a church recently, she said, Ellie, you need to go speak to more church people, which I thought that was really kind, but that was a phrase she used, church people. Finally, why do I put this out there? Why do I throw this out there to you? I throw it out because people are hurting. And somehow, when I show up, it gives them comfort. So I was most recently at a church in a very outer ring, spoke on a Thursday night, and I got done with the talk. There was time left over in the talk. People started asking me questions. They were very smart, intelligent questions, and some of it was about what it meant to be transgender. I got done with the talk. I went out front. I was sitting, signing books and selling books, and there was a young human, a teen, non-binary, so I couldn't figure out whether this person was identified as male or female, and I think they just wanted to identify as human, which I just love. That's what non-binary is. But they didn't get in line to speak to me, but they stood off to the side, and I could see that there were tears in this young human's eyes. And so I essentially interrupted selling books, and I got up because I did not want to have a conversation in front of the people who are standing in line. I just asked the people in line to buy my book. I said, please wait. And I went over to the side. We went and walked a little bit of a distance, and I went over to the side with this teen, this young human. And all they did was start sobbing and put their head on my shoulder. I wrapped my arms around this young human, and all they did was cry. And they were trying to say some things in between the tears, but I couldn't. I'm old and my hearing's not all that great. And all I just kept saying is, I care about you. I care about you. I care. about you. And I could see that the teens' parents were off in some distance. And you know what? They just waited. It was obvious that they accepted their child as who their child really was. And they waited. And they let me comfort their child. This is my work. This is what I do. This is what needs to be done in the world. So, there you have it. Invite me in. I'll come as Ellie. All right, well, that takes care of that show. You've been listening to me, Ellie Krug, on Ellie 2.0 Radio. Please tell others about this show. I need to give a big thanks to Brendan Electrolysis, one of my sponsors. Tell Bev I sent you. She does great work. And my other sponsor, Better Futures Minnesota. I could use more sponsors. Better Futures, by the way, does great work because it gives people second chances. A big thanks to Brett Johnson, my regular, wonderful, incredible producer. And to you, listeners, a big thanks to you. I do hear from you. I hear that you appreciate this show. I am trying my best to change the world, and I know many of you want that to happen as well. And so, visit my website at elliekrug.com, email me at elliejkrug@gmail, reach out to me at Instagram at elliejkrug, and do good. I'll talk to you next week. Bye.